My name is Zix, and I attend what is arguably the most prestigious military institution in the known galaxy, the Zephyrian Military Academy. Now, before you start rolling whatever optical sensors you possess, let me assure you that this is not some boastful exaggeration from a second-year cadet with delusions of grandeur. No, no, no. The Academy's reputation spans exactly 47 star systems, and trust me, I counted them twice during my particularly boring astrophysics lecture last semester. You see, the Zephyrian Military Academy does not simply accept anyone with a pulse and opposable appendages. Oh, absolutely not. We are the elite, the cream of the galactic crop, the finest specimens that each species has to offer. The admission standards are so ridiculously high that entire planetary governments regularly sacrifice their annual defense budgets just to get one of their offspring through the front gates. Walking through our corridors is like attending the galaxy's most expensive zoo, except all the exhibits can kill you in 17 different ways before breakfast. Take my roommate Venom, for instance. He is a Zilithian, which means he was born with natural armor plating that can deflect plasma rounds and reflexes faster than most starship targeting computers. Then there is Quinn from the ethereal realm of Psychos Prime, who can read minds and move objects with pure thought. Do not even get me started on the Thoraxians with their 4 muscular arms, each capable of crushing steel beams, or the Velocians who move so fast they practically teleport. Every species here earned their spot through generations of evolutionary advantages, natural selection and pure biological superiority. We are talking about beings who evolved on death worlds, survived galactic wars, and mastered technologies that most primitive civilizations cannot even pronounce correctly. Which brings me to the Academy's latest public relations disaster, the Primitive Species Integration Program. Yes, you heard that correctly. Some bureaucratic genius in the Galactic Council decided that we needed to be more inclusive, more diverse, more understanding of lesser-developed civilizations. The result? They started accepting students from planets that barely figured out faster than light travel. Last month, they actually admitted someone from Earth, a planet where the dominant species still uses projectile weapons and considers nuclear fission cutting-edge technology. Honestly, the standards these days. What is next? Accepting applications from planets that still think their sun revolves around them. But I suppose even the most ridiculous decisions can provide entertainment value. And then she walked into our advanced combat tactics classroom. Sarah Chen, according to the roster that Professor Korath read with barely concealed disgust, the human exchange student, looked, well, disappointingly ordinary. No natural armor like Ven's gleaming metallic plates. No extra limbs like Thrak's intimidating 4-armed frame. No psychic aura radiating from her brain like Quinn's constant mental hume. She was just there, standing roughly 5.5 feet tall, which made her shorter than most species in the room, with smooth pink skin that appeared laughably vulnerable compared to Rax's chitinous exoskeleton. The reaction in the classroom was immediate and predictable. Half the cadets started snickering behind whatever appendages they used for hands. Thrak, being the subtle intellectual that he is, actually pointed at her, with 2 of his arms while making that horrible grinding noise that Thoraxians call laughter. Even some of the more dignified species could not hide their amusement. I mean, seriously, what was this creature going to do if attacked? Lead on her opponents? Within minutes, a betting pool started circulating through the class. Then quietly wagered 50 credits that she would drop out before the first practical exam. Rax, ever the optimist, gave her a whole 3 weeks. Quinn, who usually stayed out of such crude activities, surprisingly contributed 20 credits to the pot, betting she would last exactly 11 days. The over-under on her first combat simulation was set at 37 seconds. But here is what bothered me, and I could not quite put my finger on why, while everyone else was busy measuring her against our obvious physical superiority. Sarah Chen just stood there, calm, observant. Her eyes moved around the room, not with the wide-eyed panic you would expect from someone clearly out of their depth, but with the methodical precision of someone conducting an inventory. She was not nervous. She was not intimidated. She was not even trying to prove herself with some pathetic display of bravado. She just watched and took notes. Lots and lots of notes. That should have been our first warning sign. Professor Korath entered the classroom with his usual dramatic flair. all 8 feet of scarred Mantilian warrior towering over us like a mobile monument to violence. His exoskeleton bore the battle marks of 3 galactic conflicts, and his compound eyes swept the room with the cold efficiency of a predator sizing up prey. "Today we discuss multi-opponent engagement scenarios," he announced, his voice carrying that particular rasp that comes from having your throat nearly torn out by Scarian deathworms. Specifically, how elite warriors handle overwhelming numerical disadvantages. This was exactly the kind of topic that got our class excited. Thrak immediately raised 2 of his 4 hands, eager to demonstrate his species' natural combat advantages. "Professor, Thoraxians can engage up to 6 opponents simultaneously using our superior reach and coordination." "Adequate," Koreth replied with typical Mantilian indifference. Then chimed in next, his armor plates shifting with anticipation. "Silithian battle doctrine focuses on defensive positioning and endurance. We can outlast most species in prolonged combat. Pedestrian, but practical." Quinn, not to be outdone, projected his thoughts directly into everyone's minds. "Itherians prefer preemptive psychic strikes to disorient multiple opponents before physical engagement begins." The professor nodded approvingly. "Now these are the tactical advantages of evolved warrior species." That was when Thrak decided to be clever. He swiveled his massive frame toward Sarah and said, "What about humans, Professor? What possible tactical advantage could a species with no natural weapons, no armor and no enhanced abilities bring to combat?" The snickering that followed was predictable. Several cadets leaned forward, eager to watch the primitive earth creature squirm under scrutiny. Sarah looked up from her notes, completely unfazed. "Well," she said in that oddly calm voice, "we make excellent bait." The classroom fell silent. She continued, still writing. "Nothing draws overconfident opponents into tactical mistakes quite like underestimating your capabilities. Works every time." Thrak's face darkened to a deeper shade of purple. "Are you suggesting that superior beings like us would fall for such primitive deception?" "I'm not suggesting anything," Sarah replied, finally setting down her stylus and making eye contact. "I'm just observing that most species seem to confuse physical advantages with actual intelligence." "Oh, now that was a direct hit." Thrak rose to his full intimidating height, all 4 arms flexing menacingly. "You dare question the intellectual capacity of warrior races? You barely qualify as sentient." Sarah tilted her head slightly, like she was considering his words carefully. Then she smiled. Not a nervous smile, not a frightened smile, but the kind of smile that suggested she was genuinely enjoying herself. "Tell you what, Thrak, if you really think I don't belong in this elite warrior class, why don't you prove it?" Thrak's 4 eyes widened in what I can only describe as delighted disbelief. Here was this tiny, soft-skinned creature, actually challenging him to combat. It was like watching a house pet challenge a battle tank to a race. You want to fight me?" he stammered, clearly not expecting his bullying to backfire so spectacularly. "Sure," Sarah said, standing up and stretching her arms above her head like she was preparing for a light workout. "Though I should probably ask." She paused, looking around the classroom at the other cadets who had been snickering at her expense. "Do you want to go one at a time, or all together?" The silence that followed was so complete that I swear I could hear Quinn's psychic abilities short-circuiting. Even Professor Koreth's compound eyes stopped their constant scanning motion. The entire room seemed frozen in a moment of collective shock. 7 cadets had been actively participating in the mockery. 7 beings who represented some of the most physically dangerous species in the galaxy. And this human was casually asking if they wanted to fight her individually or as a group. Professor Koreth was the first to recover. "This is highly irregular," he said slowly. Then after a pause that lasted approximately 3 heartbeats too long, he added, "However, it could serve as an excellent educational demonstration of tactical theory versus practical application." That was all the encouragement Thrak needed. "You heard her, everyone. She wants all of us." His grinding laugh returned, and soon Ven Rax, Quinn and 3 other cadets were standing up, forming a loose circle around Sarah. Meanwhile, the human in question was doing what appeared to be the most casual stretching routine in galactic history, rolling her shoulders, flexing her fingers, touching her toes like she was preparing for morning exercises, rather than a 7-on-1 combat scenario that should have left her as nothing more than an unpleasant stain on the classroom floor. Professor Koreth stepped back to give them room, and I found myself leaning forward with morbid curiosity. This was going to be over in seconds, but at least it would be educational in the most brutal way possible. Rax made the first move, which was his mistake. Velocians pride themselves on their incredible speed, and he blurred forward with velocity that should have been impossible to track. Sarah simply stepped aside at the last possible moment, and Rax crashed face first into the desk behind her. Speed means nothing if you can't change direction, she observed cheerfully, while Rax struggled to untangle himself from a pile of scattered data tablets. Van charged next, confident that his armor plating would protect him from whatever pathetic counterattack this soft creature could muster. Sarah waited until he was almost within reach, then dropped to the floor and swept his legs. Physics, as it turns out, affects armored Zilithians just like everyone else. Van went down hard, his momentum carrying him into a spectacular collision with the classroom wall. Heavy armor, light thinking, Sarah commented, dusting off her hands. Quinn tried to use his psychic abilities to immobilize her, his face contorting with concentration. Sarah looked directly at him and started reciting what sounded like mathematical equations mixed with grocery lists and childhood songs. The poor Itharian grabbed his head and stumbled backward, completely overwhelmed by the chaotic mental noise. Pro tip: meditation helps with focus. You should try it sometime. That was when the remaining cadets realized they might not be fighting a primitive after all. But by then, Sarah had already moved to the center of the room, positioning herself near Professor Koreth's demonstration table loaded with tactical holograms and various training equipment. The next 3 cadets rushed her simultaneously, which should have been a winning strategy. Instead, Sarah grabbed a holographic projector and triggered a blinding light burst that sent all 3 stumbling into each other. While they were trying to clear their vision, she somehow managed to tie their legs together using equipment cables. Teamwork is important, she said, watching them fall over each other like dominoes. But communication is key. Thrak, who had been watching his allies get systematically dismantled by increasingly ridiculous methods, finally lost what remained of his composure. All 4 arms swinging, he launched himself at Sarah with a roar that shook the classroom windows. This time she did not dodge. Instead, she stepped forward to meet his charge, grabbed one of his swinging arms and used his own momentum to redirect him straight into the reinforced classroom door. The impact was so tremendous that the door actually buckled, and Thrak slid down to the floor with a look of complete bewilderment. Physics, Sarah explained to the stunned silence that followed. It applies to everyone equally regardless of how many arms you have. She stood in the middle of the classroom, not even breathing hard, surrounded by 7 of the Academy's supposedly elite warriors who were variously tangled, dazed, blinded, or embedded in furniture. Her uniform was not even wrinkled. So, she said, turning to Professor Koreth with that same calm smile, "Did I pass the practical demonstration?" The professor stared at her for a long moment, his compound eyes reflecting what I could only interpret as a mixture of respect and dawning horror. "Miss Chen," he said slowly, "I believe we may need to revise our understanding of human tactical capabilities." Sarah shrugged. "Most people do eventually." Professor Koreth spent the next several minutes helping untangle cadets from various pieces of furniture while muttering what I assumed were Mantilian curses under his breath. Once everyone was back on their feet, nursing bruised egos along with their physical injuries, he turned to address the class. "What you just witnessed," he said, his voice carrying a new tone of professional respect, "was a textbook example of adaptive combat methodology. Miss Chen utilized environmental advantages, psychological warfare, and superior tactical awareness to defeat numerically superior opponents." Thrak, still rubbing his head where it had met the door, raised one of his less injured arms. "But Professor, how is that possible? Humans have no natural combat advantages." Sarah, who had taken her seat and was calmly organizing her notes, looked up. "That is exactly our advantage. When you grow up on a planet where everything wants to kill you but you have no claws, no armor, no psychic powers, and no natural weapons, you learn to get creative, fast." She gestured to the class around her. "You all evolved with built-in solutions to combat problems. We had to invent ours. That makes us very, very good at thinking outside the box when the box is trying to crush us." Professor Koreth nodded thoughtfully. "Which explains why the Galactic Council specifically requested Earth's inclusion in our military programs." "Wait, requested, not accepted out of charity?" "The betting pool. I should mention, had some interesting payouts that day. Quinn, who had bet Sarah would last exactly 11 days, was the only one who won anything, since technically she had lasted -7 minutes, and the bet required clarification from 3 different mathematics professors. Word of the incident spread through the academy faster than a Velocian sprinting from responsibility. By dinner time, Sarah Chen was no longer the primitive exchange student. She was the human who had single-handedly redefined our understanding of tactical superiority. Looking back, I realize we made the classic mistake that has probably doomed countless civilizations throughout galactic history. We judged a species by what they lacked instead of what they had learned to overcome those limitations. Sarah integrated into academy life with the same casual efficiency she had demonstrated in combat. She studied with Quinn, trained with Ven, and even helped Thrake with his tactical theory homework, though he still flinched whenever she moved too quickly near him. The Academy's perspective on Earth changed dramatically. Suddenly everyone wanted to know more about human military history, human problem-solving techniques, and human adaptability training. As for me, well, I learned never to judge a species by their lack of natural weapons. Sometimes the most dangerous creatures are the ones who had to become dangerous.